Good evening, everyone. Welcome back then to another LFM stream here for another round of the Case King Pro Series, where we are going to the wonderful, wonderful land of England. Back in home country for myself, perhaps a few of you, those in chat as well, where we are heading to Snetterton Race Circuit, a very twisty, very fiddly type of track that doesn't quite have the same, perhaps, grand heritage as somewhere like Kyalami, Spa-Francorchamps is not always the most beloved of driving circuits for those racing around here on ACC, but it is definitely a challenge and it is definitely going to put on a show for this evening. And also just another big thank you and warm welcome to all of those that continue to follow the new Twitch channel. We are now almost 222 followers to bring all the twos together, which is just incredible after only setting this up just over a week ago. So thank you so much for all of the support, and I hope you are enjoying what you are finding over here on the English Twitch channel, where we have all of the action for the Pro Series once again taking place tonight. But a bit of a recap from last week, and unfortunately the VOD did not save from last week. We have taken measures to make sure that won't happen again, so you will be able to watch the race in full and relive all of the glory that we have going on in the Pro Series tonight. But as a little bit of a recap to those that may want a bit of a refresher, or those that maybe didn't quite capture that stream, it was Tinko van der Velde who took another victory, and a dominant victory at that around Kyalami Race Circuit. The man was in a lead of his own. His fastest lap was 0.6 of a second faster than anyone else on circuit. He was an absolute animal and was at one with that Audi. As a car that's gone well at Kyalami in the past, we weren't quite sure how it was going to play out, but he did a stellar job, and as did Adam Spassky, who took another podium, finishing in second place, with Niels Narks managing to convert good, consistent pace out of that BMW M4 once again. Marco Bischoff finishing P4, Oscar Tringali got an incredible P5, and your championship leader and recent SRO GT Sprint champion, big congratulations to this man for that, George Boothby in the McLaren, who went into last round knowing that pace was going to be a little bit on the lacking side, but did still manage to get a top 10 finish, and consistency across the season is the name of the game. He, of course, has already taken some victories, but sustaining that points tally race to race, that is a thing that is going to win you the championship overall. But without any further ado, let's see what we have ahead of us. Our drivers will be having a little bit of a practice session at the moment, so we shall catch up with them very shortly. But let's get a bit more detail of this Snetterton Race Circuit. 12 turns, 4.8 kilometres of British motorsport goodness as you make your way through the first turn of Richie's very high commitment and tricky curb. I know from personal experience you can get slow puncture if you push that one on the exit a bit too hard. Down towards the Montreal hairpin, and then through in towards Palmer Curve at turn 3, Agostini turn 4. You have to be more patient on throttle there than you might think. Through turn 5 and 6 to then wrap your way through the middle sector onto the back straight after coming through Williams, and then heading through under the bridge where you have this very high commitment fast left-hander and you're turning, braking, and then have to really get yourself stopped for Nelson at turn 9. Down in towards turn 10 of Bombhole, and when we go on board you'll certainly see why it seems to live up to that name. Long right-hander through 11. It really doesn't feel like it's ever going to end, and then all of a sudden it does, in towards Murray's at turn 12, and carry that momentum down towards the start-finish line. So a very fast-paced circuit, as with a lot of the British race circuits that we generally have here on ACC. Of course, Silverstone, Brands Hatch, Oulton Park, Snetterton, they are all, and Donington as well, of course, they are very high speed, very high commitment, and this one is just perhaps that little bit more challenging. I'd say that Oulton Park and Snetterton are a little bit like for like in terms of the fact that it really does demand a lot from the driver. You have to be confident in the car, you have to be very precise in your inputs as well, and you have to be very wary of how harshly you push track limits. Often when we think about track limits, we're thinking about trying to avoid any penalties, things like that. Here at Snetterton, it's more really about preserving the longevity in your tyres and making sure they are actually going to see you through to the end of the race, because if you do start to go offline too many times, there's a lot of undulation and bumps on corner exit. It really does chuck the car around a lot, and like I say, can start to get you into a little bit of trouble when it comes to slow punctures, and that is something that all of these drivers will be looking to avoid. So we'll just get the last couple of bits and pieces in place, and then we can see how our drivers are getting on in their practice session for this evening. Of course, also, it's being a British race circuit, we also have the beloved thing that is the British weather. Perhaps, now we are on the tail end of August, all of the glorious summer that we had of 5 minutes has started to disappear, and we've started to make our way into more typical British weather territory. Grey, and quite often with a spritz of rain, which maybe isn't the best thing if you're looking to go for a walk, but if you are watching a race, it does tend to put on quite the show. So we'll have to see how that translates over for our drivers this evening as we look at the reigning Pro Series champion Grantis Carreras, who hasn't really had the best start to the season after coming into Season 10 previously without a single victory to his name. He had a dominant season where he really showed exactly the reason why he is the number I was about to say number one man on the platform. He is the Marco Bischoff. That's gone a bit unnoticed. So Marco Bischoff, well, that's completely thrown his banner in the works. We've only made ourselves 6 minutes into practice. So the number plates inside these servers and sessions are representative of the driver's relative elo to one another. So if you're a bit familiar with the likes of iRacing, that is very much a similar sort of principle. So effectively a measure of the driver's capability based on their race pace, how many positions they make up, and there's also factors of there in course of the safety racing as well to make sure they're not bumping too many doors in the process. Trevor Wenham was the man that led the way on the LFM platform for a very long time, until this man, two-time Pro Series champion Marco Bischoff for K. Kramer Racing Esports, took that number plate for a while, and in the space of the last week, he may have just snatched it away from the reigning champion Grantis Carreras, the young Lithuanian, who has stormed his way to the top of the leaderboards, but seemingly has been reeled in by the German driver who has recently made this change back away from the Porsche and has gone over to this Lamborghini. So clearly a man that is in fine form, continuing to dial in that car. How it will translate into pace though for this evening's race, we will have to wait and see, because the McLaren we think is likely to be a bit more competitive, but we're also aware that the Audi is likely once again to be very fast, and Adam Spansky already doing just that by putting himself 0.6 of a second clear of the rest of the field. Of course, this is practice, and we don't know exactly how these drivers are preparing at the moment. You can either look to try to dial in your qualifying setup, really try to get those final elements put into place so you can hit that lap and get it absolutely nailed to a T when you really need it most. Alternatively, you can just use this to maybe get a bit more familiar with the conditions, kind of get a feel for what the grip level of the track is, get everything into place, and then look to get your race setup underway. So, of course, when we have 60 minutes of racing for this evening, it was more crucial last week at Kyle Army, where we had 90 minutes of racing, that you need to be able to be confident around the circuit. You need to be able to execute lap after lap and not make a mistake, not get those corner cut warnings, not drop a wheel off the exit curb of turn 1 and get yourself a slow puncture in the process. Clearly not speaking bitterly from past experiences, but these are crucial elements that you need to take into account when you're putting together effectively what is your very heavily condensed race weekend. Of course, we all do this in just a space of a couple of hours, but the structure of it, the preparation, and the things you have to take into account are very much in keeping with all of that of real life, which is exactly what we are so used to seeing now in the world of sim racing, that all of aspects, whether it be the accuracy of the sim, the level of competition, the prizes up for grabs, grabs. We're getting closer and closer to the real thing each day, and it's a wonderful thing and journey that we've been on, not just here at LFM, but just in the world of sim racing in general. Meanwhile, Adam Spansky continues to improve on his time, does a 44.5, so now was previously 6.5 tenths clear of anyone else. Grant Caracas decides to put in the next of the 44s on a .997. His teammate, a recent SRO sprint champion, is currently 3 tenths up on his lap time, so seemingly finding pace, but the McLaren is going to be so sensitive to making use of those exit curbs. It really can be dangerous. This car and the Ferrari, not as bad as perhaps they were pre 1.9, in terms of our updates. Of course, there was a lot of revisions to the suspension physics, and these are new cars as well, which tend to have behaved a little bit better in terms of the revisions to these updates. But it is still very tricky, and these curbs are deceptively harsh. And you saw when he was on the exit of turn 10 there, that all you need to do is dip a wheel over onto the grass and you can start to be thrown around. I can tell you now, it is not a fun experience when you have that going on. Adam Spansky, though, is purple in all 3 sectors at the moment. He's going another 0.2 of a second faster, very wide on the exit final turn. He has lost a bit of time in the process, going a little bit deep as Tinko van der Velde, only good enough for P3 at the moment at 45, excuse me, .070. Meanwhile, Adam Spansky, even with that mistake, a 44.4. And that is an absolute monstrous lap time. Eric Del Fanta makes himself the next of the McLarens and puts himself into provisional P3. Of course, this is practice. Remember, some of these drivers, they just have a couple of minutes left. As I see a familiar name, Cody Sharrett, who I believe, I can't remember quite what the relation is, but to Jordan Sharrett, who is a very well-renowned fast esports driver, and I know he's moved teams relatively recently. I think I'm getting it right by saying he now drives for Ferrari. I could have that horribly wrong, though. But I'm going to gamble on that, seeing as his relative in the number 30 car is in the 296. So I feel perhaps at least vaguely justified in my assumption and analysis of that. Of course, unfortunately, we didn't have Cody last week. Would have been his home race alongside with Luke Addison, who is with us once more, currently down in P16, another of the Genesis Esports 296s. As I think we've got a new livery on board. Let's get a bit of a closer look. That's looking rather snazzy, and also very nicely depicted over the bonnet there. Of course, the South African flag, very proudly sported by Luke, who is rounding out a mighty lap at the moment. He is 0.7 of a second up. This is going to put him right towards the tippy top of this grid at the moment. And see, as he crosses the line, it's good enough for P4. So, of course, like I say, this is practice. We could see it all chop and change by the time we make our way into the main qualifying session. But that is very impressive indeed, as is this man who, whilst he is half a second away from Adam Spansky, has got himself towards the pointy end of the grid and is looking to get himself back into familiar territory. And this man has proven time and time again, he even did it the other day in SRO, that... Oh, fantastic, exactly! There we go, perfect example from George. Exactly the sort of kangarooing effect of what I'm talking about. If you run a bit wide around here, you can be jumping around, not necessarily for joy, but just holding on for dear life with these GT cars. They do not like it. They do take curves, of course, a little bit better than something like Formula 1 or prototypes, but they still run exceptionally low to the ground, very stiff suspension, generally speaking, to try to balance out the aero and make it not too dynamic in the grand scheme of things, and they will certainly be sensitive to the mighty bumps that are sitting around here. But George Boothby looking in fine form as of late, as always, and he showed the other day that he can make progression through the order, he can be spectacular in the race, and we know just how capable he has been previously here in the Case King Pro Series. So watch out for that man. The raw pace may not quite be there and could be in favour of the Audi, but that does not mean that he will be in a position not to challenge for the win. There is no doubt that he was always in with a chance, and it is going to be George Boothby, by the looks of it, going to lead the way. A little bit busy on the exit of the pit lane, but they do start to get underway and fly out from the pits as we have a stellar packed field of 39 cars for this evening, so a heftily packed grid and some familiar names. Back in the server once more, we have, of course, the beloved streamer himself, Jaroslav Honzik, who I believe had to miss out last week for some rather poor reason of going around the Nordschleife and having the time of his life, if I remember rightly. But he has decided to return back over to us here in the Pro Series. And it'll be interesting to see how he gets on dialing in this McLaren. I've saw little glimpses of some of his recent experiences in the Aston Martin over in SRO, where he was perhaps not the greatest of fans of that car. But this McLaren has generally served him a bit better as of late. And, mid-engine cars on the whole, recently, other than the BMW, maybe the Mercedes at certain circuits, but it's rare recently to find it in a particularly competitive spot, though I do know they went through quite the severe bopping process not too long ago at Monza, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it does seem that mid-engine cars as of late have just generally speaking been the better platform. But we will go on board with our championship leader, George Boothby, to lead us for the first lap in qualifying here around the Snetterton race circuit. Not the most ideal of corner exits to get the lap underway as he goes bumping and diving over Murray's corner, but as he now flies his way towards turn 1 of Richie's big commitment corner, looking for that turning inboard almost perfectly spot on the entry. It's a bit of a double apex, but you can run a bit further wide of that second one, carry the momentum on the exit as you count your way down towards into the Montreal hairpin. Slowest corner on the circuit by far. Patience on the throttle, but really good rotation here in the McLaren, and then following it through into the left-hander of turn 3 again. Have to be patient here, and you can see him scrabbling at the wheel. Get away from the exit curve before the grass kicks in, otherwise you'll be making your way into those Sunoco signs very, very soon. As he hunts his way down the gears, taking seconds through here on the power once more through turn 4. Now this is a tricky one. Watch out for that curb on the inside line. Watch out for the ball. That's going to go flying, I can tell you that much. At some point in the race, it'll probably go into Narnia very soon in qualifying as well, I'd imagine. Patience through here, get on the power as quickly as you can, straight in the line. Use this little bit of AstroTurf on the left-hand side to open up this right-hander, and then be careful of the exit, not making the same mistake that he did in the tail end of that practice session. Now as he heads to probably the highest commitment corner and trickiest corner, watch this steering wheel as he has to brake and go through this left-hander at the same time. Beautifully negotiated, avoid the sausage curb on the inside apex of the right-hander. And then back on the power, through bomb hole, massive divots and undulation through there. A little bit bumpy on the exit, but nothing too bad. And then long right-hander as you progressively make your way down the gears, using the engine braking, bit of throttle, engine braking as you go in towards Murray's corner to whip it through for a lap of Snetterton race circuit as he now heads towards the start-finish line. For George Boothby as an opening effort for his qualifying session is a 45.3, but we know that there are times that are looking mightily quick around here. Tanford's a hacker, the first of the Audis immediately to the 45.0. Whereabouts is the likes of Adam Spassky? He's just coming through the final turn now. Sectors. Oh, that's a big slide on the exit there, and a little bit of a jump through the ground as well. Delfanta goes up to the front row. Sasha Vasta and the Mercedes. British GT circuits have actually suited the Mercedes in the past, but Adam Spassky soars up to the top of the timing tables and goes on a 44.8, so 3/10 clear of the rest of the order. Seems to have had a slight kerfuffle with the leaderboard. Hopefully that shall sort itself out in just a moment. There we go. As Tinko van der Velde, 2 purple sectors to this man's name. And a very, almost a matching colour scheme on the car as well. As the number 7 car flies into the Montreal hairpin, a 44.7, just half a tenth quicker than the Polish driver that sits currently in that P2 spot. Second time in 2 races, it would be a front row lockout for these 2 Audis that have been looking mightily fast at this stage of the season, as Tinko tries to reignite some of his championship hopes and claw his way back towards that points tally of George Boothby, because it's been a pretty handy opening bid to this season from the British driver. Just looking further around the circuit, we've got Amber Manson, number 14. Big improvement for him at the moment. 0.6 of a second up in that very nice looking STL Esports McLaren. see him get within a second of the pole time if he can neaten this final corner up. It's a good exit. He did lose a little bit on the exit of turn 12, but he's still 0.8 of a second up on his previous best. So it's going to be a mighty time in towards the top 10 for the Swedish driver, and he's right on the bubble of the top 10, but he may get shuffled out just a little bit by other cars as they come through, but I do need to check back in with this man. Let's go on board in actual fact with the number 7 car. Adam Spansky does improve, I believe, but only by a small margin. As now Tinko van der Velde 0.3 up on his lap time, and he's looking to obliterate the timing table. And it's Marco Bischoff who temporarily goes to pole, but Tinko van der Velde says, thank you very much, I'll have this one back. But it's right now a V10 shootout at the top 3 spots of the order. Audi, Lamborghini, Audi, and Marco Bischoff back to number 1 ways on the LFM platform, almost back to number 1 in the grid that would make up this 60-minute race for this evening. He was purple in the middle sector, but we know just how good that man is in the cockpit and when he is behind the wheel. So even if he does only start on the front row, still he is very much within winning territory around this circuit. Opportunities for overtakes are relatively limited, but it's a very tricky and technical circuit, and sometimes those overtakes can appear at the most ridiculous of times and scenarios, because if a driver in front of you just gets it slightly wrong, makes a mistake, it very much can swing in your favour. And I think that, you know, trying to open up those opportunities, it's a little bit less car dependent, perhaps, when we see other circuits, you know, because the momentum that you carry from corner to corner is very much in terms of what you're extracting out of those corners, rather than the necessary grunt that you've got from your car. Whereas, you know, Kyle Army, even though it is very challenging, very twisty, the Audi, we know, has an abundance of power, and it makes use of it down that very long start-finish straight, and also on the run down the hill through Mineshaft as well. It doesn't quite have the same opportunities here. So we might see some other cars getting a bit involved near the top. Tasman's Hacker went very quickly as Adam Spansky does improve to a 44.3. Now we've got a fight on our hands. He was purple in the first sector, and it was nip and tuck with Tinko, who's already going very quickly, and by 7 thousandths, it's not by a big margin. The Dutchman who dominated out at Kyle Army, he may have a bit more of a fight on his hands. Of course, didn't improve in that middle sector, but it was good in the second and the first and the third. So it wasn't a poor lap by the race winner from last week, but Adam Spansky looking very, very quick in that number 4 Audi as they look to go out for another flying lap. Meanwhile, the man that has joined a relatively new and upcoming roster that's had quite the acquisition of drivers. The number 9 of Mattia De Campo, the Italian driver who we've had in the Pro Series for a good couple of seasons, now improving, not quite in the end. Did actually go faster than his previous best, but invalidated, I believe, on the exit of the final turn. Meanwhile, someone that is flying along in this V10 Lamborghini is the K-Chroma Racing esports driver of Marco Bischoff, your 2-time Pro Series champion, a man that has taken many a victory in this series. It's been a bit more difficult over the last couple of seasons, but he's been finding pace, and right now he's going very, very quickly. He was briefly 0.2 of a second up through bomb hole now. Very calm over the exit curb of turn 10. It's a tricky one sometimes to hook up, but the German doing it very nicely. How does he fare through this final turn? It's a little bit deep on the exit. Whether or not he has sacrificed time there. It should be good enough, maybe just about to sneak in front of Tasman Hacker for P3, and when he hits a timing beam, it isn't. So that mistake out of the final corner loses him valuable time. Meanwhile, Brandon Reyes in the number 23 car in the Audi. Very impressive stuff from him. Currently sitting in P5. We've got Carpenter in P6 and George Boothby in P7. He'll be hoping to see if he can maybe get a bit more of an improvement in the closing stages of the session. We get a face full of pole as we look for Vincent Perel and the number 35 Ferrari 296 make his way through the middle sector. Now has currently found a 10th. So has Grantis Korekis, currently sitting in P9 on his lap. Whereabouts is Korekis? I think he's got a little bit less to go than who we were on board with a moment ago, Proel in the number 35. And in actual fact, it's directly the next car ahead of the Ferraris. Lost a little bit of time, though, heading under the bridge now. Big commitment on entry. See Mishima finding a little bit of an improvement in the early part of the lap. Fairly okay, but it was a compromised exit for the Lithuanian driver. Pretty calm through the exit of turn 10, so it's all going to have to be about this one. And it's so easy to just keep on trying to claw back the time, take more and more speed, but you have to set up Murray's corner, otherwise you lose all of that momentum down towards the start-finish line. But I don't think it's going to be an improvement on this lap from Karekasen. So we'll have to see whether or not the likes of some of our other drivers, Sven Poor on a lap in the number 27 car, was marginal with previous Delta, trying to see if he can sneak his way up in towards the top 10. As your front runners starting to set out on some laps again. Tanzvezaka very brave on the exit of turn 1. I'm not sure it's particularly benefited him as he tried to wind his way through turn 2 now. The Audi's natural agility and the slow speed definitely helping it out in these sections. Also got pretty good torque out of this car as well, so he's able to really power his way through. The 296 of Addison currently 10th of the second up, and he's only made his way towards turn 3, so that could see himself jump up in towards the top 10 if he can carry that momentum forward. Kareka's currently sitting in the pits. He needs to leave relatively soon if he wants to get in any last efforts, as more and more drivers trying to see if they can find a lap time. Cody Sherritt is one of them in the early stages of his lap. So is Stortebecker, the next of the Audis in that number 33 car. Currently sitting in 31st position. Make that 32nd as Peter Duvelaar in the number 22 McLaren Full Velocity Viper. The Dutchman make his way up in towards the early stages of the outside or top 30 positions. Someone else on improvement, we've got Francesco Gardinetto for Carlonia Racing. He's found 4/10 of a second, so that could really see him make his way probably towards the top 20 if he maintains that sort of improvement, as Kareka's going very slowly. Not sure if he just came out of the pits or if this is his first bid, but didn't look like the greatest of turns for the Lithuanian driver, and I think he has invalidated this lap, so maybe he's just come out of the pits and looking to go for one last fly to see if he can jump his way back up the order. We'll check in with some of those further down as Tony Mahoney in the number 29 BMW looking to jump up in towards P19. Good stuff there from the RTF Race Academy driver, as he is joined by an improvement on its way potentially from Dennis Veach. Not with a line like that though, and that is exactly the sort of upset that these McLarens especially can get. In actual fact, that I think that's Sven Poor that is going to get a little bit of a slipstream. He does make his way past, as Michael Freithing also coming across in the background, as flying in towards through this left-hander, trying to gain time, as Tinko van der Velde is on a lap as well. He's just coming into the Montreal hairpin. Adam Spansky right behind him. That's a menacing sight for the Dutchman to be dealing with, because the man that he is currently really battling with for pole position is right on his gearbox and trying to get himself every advantage he can. Maybe learn a little bit about where Tinko's pace is coming from, as Tanvizahaka has binned it on the exit of turn 9 there. He's gone too deep, and he was briefly 0.3 of a second up, but that will be it. Then he won't start any higher than P3 for the Hymo setups driver. Marco Bischoff has just started making his way down towards under the bridge. I tell you what though, Tinko van der Velde is absolutely flying and maybe about to put on the sort of performance that he did at Kyalami, and if it were to make it 2 for 2 on the bounce, this could really start to bring himself back into championship contention. Number 34 car of Who was that further down the order? That was Patrick Meyer, has retired from the session as we look to close out qualifying. Few drivers improving, and Spansky's pulled over, so he won't start any higher than a P2. So it's looking good for Tinko van der Velde. Someone's driven off into the grass and is doing the local community some very valuable long cutting services. But Tinko, on the other hand, he's got bigger priorities as he looks to try and fly his way out through turn 12. It's not the best of exits. It's going to be very marginal with his time. It's still a fantastic performance from the Dutchman. Does he improve? He does on a 44.232, and he takes pole position by a 10th and a half. But there are other drivers still in the order looking to make their way a bit higher up. Sasha Vasta is one of them. Omoshima is another, trying to see if he can shuffle his way in towards the top 10. He does get himself into P9. Sasha Vasta's got a little bit more of a lap to go. Luke Addison, same story for him. Whereabouts is our championship leader right now? George Boothby starting in P7 and is already in the pit, so no further improvements for him. What about Mattia De Campo for Thomas Enger Sim Racing coming in towards turn 12 now on the power in the McLaren? Does sometimes struggle to get those rear tyres to grip up initially under power. Very aggressive ECU map, very familiar with the 488. He gets himself up to P11, almost up in towards the top 10, but doesn't quite manage it. Sasha Vasta did not improve on his last lap. What about this man, though, for Genesis Esports? As Addison makes his way out of Murray's End, trying to see what he can do in the Ferrari 296 number 20 car, taking the shortest run to the line that he can. He's going to make his way up a couple of spots. He does get into towards the top 10 in the close stage, and I don't think there's anyone that is going to threaten to take that away from him. Nico Pendon is a Lamborghini, very far off from home over to the right-hand side of the circuit. But that then is your qualifying session. And Tinko van der Velde once again getting the job done. And also, just as a little bit of background information, two cars there got 5-second time penalties for causing a collision. One of them was Valentin Barrier, the Frenchman. That is not the greatest of starts, potentially, to his session around here, but the other one was the number 20 car, and that belongs to Luke Addison. So the South African, coming from his local circuit last time out, has then made his way over to Snetterton, and that is not the way he would have wanted to get his evening going. And of course that will be added at their pit stops for that. If you get a time penalty and you haven't served it during a pit stop, it will be added onto your time at the end of the race once you cross the finish line. But unfortunately, for those drivers in particular, then 5-second penalties, and that is really going to compromise their race position during the middle portion of this 60-minute sprint around Snetterton race circuit. Tinko van der Velde taking another pole position, though, and starting to reignite very, very well his championship hopes, and looks to start in front of his teammate and Adam Spansky once more as the Audis look very, very quick. And you can see Tinko in that high-mo setups car looking very, very nice. Ahead of this man in number 4 car, the Polish driver, doing a very good job once more. As for high-mo setups in P3, Felix Tanvinzer-Hacker, solid effort, did seemingly have more in the tank, but couldn't quite put it together. Meanwhile, Marco Bischoff, who snuck his way up the order last time out at Kyalami, good stuff from him again to start in P4. Brandon Raiz, fantastic job from the number 23 car. Same for Felix as well. Whenever you see a higher number plate than their time position, there's a big difference. That means a driver with a relatively low elo in the server has done a stellar job. So great stuff there from Brandon. Timu Karppinen starts in P6 with George Boothby in P7. Eric Del Fante, the next of the McLarens, in P8. Meanwhile, the Japanese driver, Kazuki Omoshima, your race winner from Valencia earlier on this season. The track where he made his debut last season and certainly turned up, making a name for himself. Hasn't quite dialed in the McLaren throughout the season in the way that perhaps we would have expected. Valencia was a glimmer of what we know that man is possible of achieving. but a solid qualifying position for him to start today. Anderson rounds out the top 10 with Vasta and De Campo making the 6th row of the grid. Meanwhile, Grantis Carreras is followed up by his sister teammate of Jardier, who has returned to us for another race here in the Pro Series. Sven Bohr, the number 27 car. Good stuff from him as well in the BMW, and I think potentially the first of the BMWs as well for that outfit. Starts in P15. Valentin Barry, who of course has already had a rather tricky qualifying session other than his qualifying position, and is going to have a rather compromised race to deal with at that. Alvin Manson starts 17th with Cody Sherratt starting in 18th in this Ferrari 296 with Mikael Sundstrom. Another one of the Swedes. We seem to be gathering quite a few Swedes in this grid. We started off, I believe, with Manson, and then we seem to be slowly but surely acquiring more and more. So it's fantastic to see more and more spread of LFM and nationalities joining the Pro Series and the world of sim racing in general. Fantastic to have everyone participating. Paul Lotmeyer rounds out the top 20 with Jan Drexler and Tony Mahoney making up the 11th row of the grid. Nico Pennon starts in 23rd position with Dennis Vitschork, who made that little bit of a mistake and really demonstrated how quickly the Snetterton race circuit can bite you. He starts 24th with Vincent Proel in the number 35 car, starts in 25th position. And Samir Fogg, that was the Lamborghini that we saw on the grass at the end, just doesn't seem to have dialed in the pace with this car. We know that he's capable of some really strong performances. Of course, quite the specialist in the Ferrari for a long time, but just hasn't found the pace in that Lambo that we perhaps would have expected, and has been shown by a few other drivers in the server, of course, Marco Bischoff in particular. Simonov, Frey, and Kohlberg Brennan starts in 27th, 8th, and 9th respectively, with Oliver Hagstrom rounding out the top 30. Jonathan Clifford, the American driver, starts in 31st position with Francesco Gardinetto, the next of the McLarens. And then starting behind him will be Peter Duvela in that number 22 Velocity Viper McLaren there, and Hendrik Stortebecker in the number 33 car starts in P34. Philip Weimann, nice livery on board that car there. He starts in 35th position. And I may actually need some help on that flag, because I didn't quite catch what that was for long enough, but that didn't immediately spring to mind there, so someone could help me out with that. That would be lovely. Good to know where all of these drivers have made their way in from, as Philip Weimer in 35th, Patrick Meyer in 36th, Chris Smith 37th, Alexander Kruk in 38th, and rounding out the grid, Pavel Stenner rounds out your grid order for this evening then, as we look to very shortly get underway for 60 minutes of racing. And a big thank you for the kind comments in the chat, and a continually warm welcome to all of those that are joining the Twitch channel. We've already gained even more followers since the very start of this stream, so if you are enjoying what you are watching here in the Pro Series, then do consider giving us a follow, where you can see all of the fantastic Pro Series action week in, week out. But meanwhile, Tinko van der Velde, he is a man very familiar with taking victories in the Pro Series on ACC. He's done it all. But right now he has a very competitive Aaron Spansky lurking on his gearbox, who maybe doesn't want him to quite run away as much as he did last week. And being in the land of England, we could have potentially some differences in the weather, because we have a 6-kilometre-an-hour wind. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the weather system on ACC, usually with a higher wind, we're going to have higher variability, and we've got some pretty grey skies, not very high temperatures either. So, even though we've got 30 minutes of dry running, and that'll see our way into the pit stop window, these drivers have a mandatory pit stop and a central window to do that stop in, there's a good chance that we could see some wet weather by the end of this race. And when that throws a spanner in the works for certain drivers, who will shine, who will prevail, we'll have to wait and see. But Tinko van der Velde is trying to make it 2 on the bounce, and see if he can get another Audi victory to his name, as they all start to make their way towards the start line, waiting for the green lights to go out. We'll wait for the roar of lights then for the GT drivers. They get underway for round 7 on the Pro Series. Immediately on the defense with Marco Bischoff because Brandon Raiz all the way down the inside in towards turn 1. It got very busy there. There's Korekis and George Boothby making their way through as well. Someone off, I think that was Del Fanta, and has rejoined the circuit in the background as they make their way down towards Montreal Hairpin for the first time. But it's Tinko Van der Velde leads ahead of Spansky. Then it's Tan Hacker, Bischoff, Timu Karpinen. Great starts for him, sitting behind Marco Bischoff in that P5 spot, and George Boothby managed to just about navigate his way through there as it's side by side also with Omashima and Mattia De Campo battling inside of the top 10. Omashima sent towards the outside there by the Tomasenko driver. Jardier sending right on the inside of the number 18 car as they now make their way in towards his next left-hander for the first time. Tricky to do a little bit of contact in the background there, but I think everyone just about survived. Okay, and Omashima does hold on to position for the time being, but it's Tinko Van der Velde who got the dream start away in towards the first turn. A little bit busy in the background and a couple of casualties further down the order, but nothing too awful. But it's still kicking off. Look at the DAS being kicked up as they now head in through this very tricky right-hander onto Bentley Straight now. That was Jonathan Clifford going a little bit wide in the background. That's going to leave him susceptible on the run towards the bridge corner then. Through this left-hander, it's getting very busy. That's Del Fanta trying to set one up the inside as well, heading through that turn and in towards the right-hander. They managed to make their way through safely for the time being, but it is very busy throughout this mid-pack. Grantis Korekis got a little bit shuffled down the order in the process as well, but he does manage to survive relatively cleanly. So Tinko Van der Velde leads away up front. Spansky, Tan Hacker, Bischoff, Karpinen, Raiz, and George Boothby, followed up by Addison, De Campo, and then Omashima make up your top 10. There's a little bit of squabbling going on further down the order. I think that's Tony Mahoney and Vincent Proel trying to go side by side. That's Brave around the outside from the German drivers. He's going to be just about left enough space. But here comes Samir Fox now trying to make his way through on the outside. He can't get to the inside. The Ferrari is still there. BMW still all the way around the outside as they go into the Montreal Hairpin. It's side-by-side action in the background as well. Jonathan Clifford, Brenham, Crook and Weimer caught up in that as well. But Tony Mahoney gets the job done, does he? As he heads through turn number 3. And he does, in towards Oggy's corner. What a corner name that is. Excuse me, that's Palmer. As they make their way through there. Samir Foster having to defend from the McLaren. That's Simonov trying to go all the way around the outside, but he's unable to do so. Immediately stacked up, like I said. It's tricky around it to make an overtake, but Marco Bischoff has found an opportunity in the Lamborghini, and he has soared his way up in towards P3 in those crucial podium spots, because he is also in the midst for the championship. And with George Boothby currently sitting in P7, whilst it be a solid result, it's possibly not going to be enough to hold on to a championship lead after this one. All the way around the outside, Timu trying to hold on position, but Brandon Raiz, he's got the grunt, he's got the power, and he makes his way up into 5th position in the Audi. George Boothby immediately on the attack of Karpinen, because it's McLaren. Typically, it hasn't got the outright straight line speed to execute the overtakes, but when you've got the SRO GT Sprint champion behind the wheel, anything is possible. Timu struggling a little bit seemingly in the early stages of this race, but Tinko Van der Velde not particularly gapping away at the front. Still within a second is Adam Spansky, only a difference of 2/10, not even that, on the last lap then. So Tinko, he has to be mindful of how it plays out with the gap. We saw it in Indianapolis that Spansky was able to hold on to him in the early phase of the race, but it did start to really extend as the tyre degradation increased. So we'll have to see whether or not Tinko is going to be the master of Snetterton and add another race victory to his tally, or will it go the way of the Polish driver if he can reel him in. You can see, though, they've got quite the gap now between themselves and Marco Bischoff. Tanvin Zahaka locked onto the gearbox of that Lamborghini, trying to see if he can reclaim a position anytime soon. Meanwhile, a little bit swapping further down the order as Simonov comes under pressure from Chris Smith, I think. Had a bit of a swapsies down towards the Montreal hairpin, but number 25 car does come out on top for the time being. So let's have a little bit of a look on the terrain around just outside the top 10, because we have De Campo, Omashima, Honzig, Vassner, Kurekas, and Barrier, and not too far adrift, Sherritt, Manson, Bohr, Penn, and Lotmeyer. Almost a full 10-car train, locked horns throughout the middle sector of this circuit as they each try to find any advantage that they can. A little bit deep though under brakes, and it's cost him a bit of time, but it might be Manson and Paul that are swapping position. And with Manson gets the move done over Sven Paul, who's immediately got Nico Pennon on the attack. What about Dennis Wieczorka versus Sandstrom? It's Sandstrom that gets a position. What about Del Fanta, who's trying to find a way up the inside? We go on board the front splitter of the Italian John McLaren called went off at turn 1 on the opening lap, trying to get down the inside in towards Murray's corner. Tricky to do it through there. Oh, a little bit of contact with Wieczorka on the exit there, and now trying to make it 3 wide is Oliver Hagstrom. Which way is he going to go? Barely ahead with given between them. He can't find the space. Eric Del Fanta's got the run. Oliver's trying to force the issue, see if he can get down towards the inside. He can't, so to the outside he goes. Almost contact again through turn 1, braced up, and now Jan Drexler's in the midst of this as well. Trying to go down the inside is the German driver. Can he get it done? No. Dennis covers the inside line, and he will only make it 2 positions lost in just as many corners, and Jan Drexler tries to find an opportunity elsewhere in the lap. Meanwhile, at the front, Tinko still leading. Gap has been maintained roughly between all those cars sitting around the top 10, but it's all kicking off further down the order, and this is what we love about the Pro Series. It doesn't matter at the end of the day whereabouts you are in the field, because you know that you are going to be in for a fantastic race. This is what this system allows you to do, and we have fantastic racing week in, week out. As you see now, Peter Duvala for the Velocity Viper McLaren, try and see if he can find any opportunity. A little bit of dirt kicked up there, wide moment from the BMW behind of Øystein Kohlberg, but crucially keeps it all together. In actual fact, that was a very good exit from Michael Freya. Big mistake from Stortebecker. The Porsche now not the best in a straight line. It's all kicking off. In actual fact, because Sammy Foss trying to get down the inside as well towards the left-hander, and he does manage to get it done. The BMW following behind Wieczorka, Stortebecker and Michael Frey side by side on the exit as well. Now is bringing Duvala into prey, but he can't quite get it done as they head in towards Bommel, but he does get through there in the end, losing 2 positions in the process for the Audi, but they do manage to keep on going, and the fight will go on. 44s for the top 3. No one else has managed to do that. But crucially, Tinko van der Velde able just to extend his advantage a little bit over Araspansky. As I thought there was going to be a send up the inside there from Stortebecker. I think Michael Frey was wary of that one as well. Surely doesn't send it from that far away towards the Montreal hairpin. He has managed to just force Michael Frey to go a little bit away from the exit, but the Porsche is good at getting the power down. It's got fantastic acceleration and manages to hold on to the position for the time being. So I'm getting a little bit of info through the chat then. And well, the stewards, of course, I cannot particularly say or give my take on some of these things, but there are processes in place with the way these things play out. And if they, they have a number of camera angles, they will watch the replays many a time before they arrive at a decision. So, of course, they have a lot more information at their disposal than we do on the cameras, because these guys barely give us a chance to breathe. All the way around the outside, big oversteer moments around the outside. Igor Simonov, how he gets the power down and keeps the momentum up onto the Bentley straight is beyond me. Down the inside now towards Brundle Curve, the BMW behind of Chris Smith trying to follow him through, gets the move done. Does he in towards Nelson? He does bring it all together in the end. That was a fantastic move around the outside. It was a little bit scary, I imagine, on board that car, but he does keep it all together. Meanwhile, now Tinko starting to get into his groove. 1.4 seconds is the gap between Tinko and Adam Spansky. And Marco Bischoff coming under increasing pressure from Tanvin Zahaka. Having got that move done not too long ago, he hasn't quite managed to extend the advantage in the way that we might have thought that he potentially would do. Tanvin Zahaka, he did have an invalidated lap last time around, but it was a 44.9. So still half a second away from his teammate as Carpenter very close up to the back of Brandon Reyes, who's bringing George Boothby in tow as well. as they all scrabble for position, making their way in towards this very fiddly middle sector. Down through in towards the next turn, following their way through the right-hander of Williams then. See how's the Lamborghini Ferron exit look. Very bumpy for Brandon, and the slipstream is relatively powerful. The GT3 car making its way in towards the vicinity of Audi in front as they head under the bridge into Brundle once more, but he's not quite close enough in the end, and the Audi's pretty handy through there. A little bit scrappy for both cars, but in the end the Audi does just about come out on top. Tansin Zahaka still staining the pressure onto Marco Bischoff. It's a pretty menacing name to have in front of you. Meanwhile, Del Fanta trying to make some progress back through the field. He's made his way past Mikael Sundstrom now. And we will try and have a little bit of a look at a replay of how he managed it. The Italian, who ends up being pushed off rather unceremoniously down as turn 1. So he was closing in towards Brundle then, and it looks like it might have been a mistake from Sundstrom. Oh, there you go, just clips a little bit of a sausage curb there, and on the run up towards Baumhauer, the McLaren says thank you very much, goes back the inside, keeps it all tidy on the exit, and Del Fanta crucially gets himself up in towards the top 20. So good stuff there from him. Meanwhile, it's been kicking off between Jardier and Sasha Vassner, and Vassner now under all sorts of pressure from the two McLarens of Korekis and Valentin Barabine. I do want to try to see if I can what happens to the Mercedes, but I can't because Korekis sending one on the inside in towards Agostini now. The Mercedes trying to hold it around the outside. It's a tricky thing to do, but the McLaren does get the power done early. It's tricky on the outside line there. You can't really get the grip or the momentum in the way that you would necessarily like to, and they fly through that middle sector. But granted, Korekis and Jardier then both managing to make their way through. Jardier sitting in P11, Korekis now P12. As further scraps down the order, we've also got the likes of Jan Drexler versus Veit Schorka. Also the likes of Kohlberg Brenner goes very wide on the exit. In actual fact, he goes from being the hunter to being the hunted, because here comes Jonathan Clifford in that Lamborghini. We know the BMW is pretty handy in a straight line, but I don't know, has it got enough power relative to the V10? And he does in the end, and as long as he has a fairly clean run through here, he should be fairly safe, although someone isn't. Simonov versus that is Alexander Krauk on the exit now of Nelson Corner. Doesn't get the job done there. Still applying the pressure, though. Someone that's had a very busy time, though. Eric Del Fanta, who now has an absolute face full of Paul Lobmeyer's Porsche. And Mikael Sundstrom's in the party as well, as they're trying to make it 3 wide down towards turn 1. Surely Del Fanta gets a little bit of a nudge from the Porsche and manages to keep it together. The Porsche's got bigger problems now, because here comes Sundstrom down the inside in towards the Montreal curve. And there's a further bit of bumping in the STL Esports car. That's Oliver Hagstrom trying to make his way through as well. He can't quite get alongside the Porsche there, and he stays out of it, but a little bit of bumping between those cars. Del Fanta makes his way out to P19. Sundstrom gets himself in towards the top 20. Lobmeyer loses out as a result then from all of that battling. Meanwhile, last lap, Andrzej Spansky was just a half a tenth faster than Tinko van der Velde. The previous laps, he had a similar sort of advantage. Maybe the Polish driver starting to hit his groove just a little bit, because he has closed that gap now from 1.4 seconds down to a second, and he of course still has 46 minutes left on the clock. Still plenty of opportunity for him to close the gap and potentially find his way into the lead of this race. What a drive from him that would be. Meanwhile, looking at Karppinen versus Brandon Reyes, still the Lamborghini hasn't quite been able to do anything about that Audi that sits in front. Meanwhile, looking further down the order, though, two people looking very close together briefly was Oliver Hagstrom and Paul Lobmeyer, gaining in the slipstream, I would imagine, but I think a bit of a mistake down through Nelson. It's a tricky braking zone to get right when you're following up close behind another car. Meanwhile, Adam Spansky gains just another half a tenth over Tinko van der Velde, just bringing that gap down slowly but surely, and just letting the Dutchman know that he is not quite going to be running away with it this time, as perhaps he has done before. Meanwhile, Korekis, a couple of tenths behind Jardier as the two McLarens, sister teammates, of course, through Veloce and Yassit. And this little four-way scrap where we have Jardier, Korekis, Vassner, Barrier all trying to fight for position and score crucial points. The points do run pretty far down the order in this series. Like I say, it's all about consistency. So even if you do finish outside the top 10, it's not the most crucial thing in the world. But of course, these drivers, fantastically talented behind the wheel, and very much will be looking to try to score as much as they possibly can, because they want to get themselves up the championship order. When there are some fantastic prizes up for grabs, you can bet on the fact that these drivers are going to be giving it everything. Meanwhile, the scrap for P5, Brandon Ray's continuing to struggle just a little bit. And look at that blue McLaren just bit by bit sneaking his way up into contention. George Boothby generating a bit of a gap from Luke Addison behind, who of course is carrying that 5-second time penalty. As they now fly their way through in towards bomb hole and seeing how they can try to find pace. It's very back and forth sometimes between these cars. Looks like a Lamborghini maybe just a little bit more agile in this final sector. Whether that be down to setup, it could be better preservation of the tyres. But it's a fantastic exit from the Finnish driver. And let's go on board George Boothby, because he's going to have a wonderful view of it. But the Audi grunt kicks back in. Brandon Ray saved by the V10 in his car once again. Carpenter wants to get up the inside, but he just can't quite get alongside the Audi that sits in front of him, and he will have to wait behind for another moment. But Brandon Ray's under an immense amount of pressure in that number 23 car. Of course, Carpenter, previously a race winner here in the Case King Pro Series, and when he did win that race, he won it in dominant fashion around the formidable Bathurst race circuit. So he is a man with a lot of confidence in that car, but he's really having to work for it to be running all the way onto the track limits and a bit more down towards the inside. Oh, he couldn't quite get the inside there, and Brandon Ray's not shaken up by that at all. He takes his racing line and allows the Lamborghini to just fall back a little bit in towards the clutches of George Boothby, your championship leader, who's trying to see if he can pick positions up through the squabbling of others. That's what he's so good at. Sometimes when he doesn't quite have the car underneath him to really fight for position, he waits for them to make a mistake, and then he strikes, and he's gaining now in the slipstream. Big momentum loss for Carpenter as they head towards Brundle Curve. Surely nothing he can do about a Bloche Sports McLaren. He's trying to fight it on the outside, but George Boothby, opportunistic as ever, signs his way by and gets his way up into P6. And Carpenter then, after trying to make his way in towards the top 5, now finds himself under pressure to just hold on to P7 in this race. And there's still 42 minutes of action left to go, where we are going to be treated to more and more battles like this. The next one on the cards, potentially this one down here for 28th position. Stortzbecker at the front of this group. Then we have Peter Duvela, as that's a mistake, and I tell you, it happens in the weirdest of places, because that's now surely going to give an opportunity to the number 22 car, but he just can't get himself in a position to get alongside the Audi of Stortzbecker. In actual fact, it's a good run out of the final turn for number 33 car, so McLaren will just have to sit in the slipstream, but he's got to be mindful of that BMW behind. We know how good they are in a straight line, and whilst there's not too many straight sections around this tight, twisty British circuit, they certainly do add up. And something else is coming into effect as well. Who was that getting very close together? I think that was Jan Drexler onto the back of Dennis Wietschorka. Very, very nice looking livery car, but he has got the number 17 gaining on him all the time. Looks up towards the inside into Agostini, but can't get the job done there. Just have to wait for another opportunity. Maybe can apply the pressure on the run up the Bentley Straight. As also notably, Adam Spansky just again hovering around the time delta for Tinko van der Velde. It's still a second between himself and your race leader. Tinko not able to escape in the way that we saw him execute out at Kyalami. And now Jan Drexler, he's at a mighty exit through Williams Curve. They're trying to use that BMW straight line speed. Can he get across the nose? He can! Down in towards Nelson Curve there. And as long as he gets his stops, I may have spoken too soon. The McLaren's going to come back, and Samir Foch is trying to have a little go himself in all of this. He's carrying great momentum. This is not an overtake opportunity, surely, and he can't get down the inside before Karam. And they fly through turn 11 now. Will he be able to open up the exit? We know the McLaren isn't the greatest in a straight line, but it's a good exit by the looks of it for the number 13 car. So he will live another day. But fantastic move there from Jan Drexler. As meanwhile, still scrabbling just outside of the top 10. This little train led by none other than Jardier, with his sister teammate Grant Karekas, then Sasha Vassner and Valentin Barrier in tow as well. The pit window has now opened. Now, this will be really interesting. We know that there is the potential for there to still be some late rain. It's looking less and less likely, admittedly, because we have 30 minutes of dry weather for the foreseeable future in this race, but it certainly can strike at the most unhelpful of times. And if it does land in those closing stages, I think it would potentially land too late for anyone to consider going very long into this pit stop window and trying to see if they can get themselves onto the wet tyres at the very end. It just won't happen. But it could certainly add a splash of chaos in more ways than one. Meanwhile, Sasha Vassner trying to see if he can get up the inside of Grantis Karekas. And exactly with 6 kilometers now of wind on the way, certainly can have quite the changeable conditions in the latter stage of this race. What a way to end here at Snetterton that would be if we have drivers on these worn, slick tyres. And as it can downpour in England in only the way that England can, it was certainly really put on the show for these GT drivers trying to tackle this tricky technical circuit, and immediately into the pits then. Both Grant Karekas, there's some very early pitters here. Obviously, they are thinking this undercut is extremely powerful. It does put a lot of stress through the tyres, and also if you want a little bit of a kangaroo effect, go in the pit lane of first to the race circuit. You'll be in for a fun ride. It's a very, very bouncy circuit on that inside corner towards the right-hand side of the car. Meanwhile, these are your race leaders who have gapped Marco Bischoff down in P3. Whereas a 4.2 second gap, there's the Lamborghini and the fellow Hymo Setups car just following in tow further down the order for Tan Vinza Hacker. But it's these two, Tinko van der Velde and Adam Spansky. Tinko, a little bit of an extension on his lead last time around. Timings look fairly even between them on this lap in particular, so perhaps just a little bit of a mistake from the number 4 car. It was 44.8 for Tinko on the last lap, 45.1 for Adam Spansky. You can see really trying to make sure he stays away from those bits of grass on exit, and wise to do so as well, because those slow punctures can absolutely shatter your race winning hopes. Again, although not that I'm bitter about it in any sense of the imagination, I can say from personal experience that they are certainly deadly and impactful on your race if you do end up getting them. Meanwhile, Luke Anderson continuing to sustain the pressure on the back of Teemu Karp. In actual fact, pretty good exit for 296 there, but I don't think he's got the straight line potential against that V10 powered Lamborghini to have much of a chance of changing positions there. Meanwhile, a couple of white flags for a moment for both Chris Smith and Patrick Meyer. I don't think in the end anything particularly happened between those two, as now Samir Foch comes into the pits as well in the number 26 car. And these drivers seemingly very, very mindful of wanting to go for the undercut strategy very early on. Could theoretically work out, I suppose, but you know, when those tyres do start to wear, of course, it is a circuit that is difficult to overtake at by nature. That said, though, it's not going to be easy to hold on to the position that you inherit as a result of that undercut if you are on worn tyres around here, because it is very, very punishing and it does start to stack up very quickly. Meanwhile, George Boothby continuing to reel in Brandon Reid. He did it by a tenth and a bit last time round, and Teemu Karppinen, after making that mistake, has really dropped away from these two, and George Boothby just doing what he has continued to do in these races and score very consistent points. And right now he's looking for an opportunity to make his way up into the top 5 of this race. And when you consider that the McLaren very much not in line with the best performing cars around this circuit, it certainly has been a bit of a weaker time for the car that was so dominant upon initial entry this season, as Jan Drexler makes a mistake by the looks of it in the number 17 car, and that allows Oliver Hagstrom to go through. What on earth happened then to the German driver? You see, there was definitely quite a substantial gap between themselves. Cody Sherratt and Sven Poor have come into the pits in the meantime. So it's going to be a mistake by the looks of it. Through in towards Brundle. Oh, just gets his braking completely wrong through there. Over the grass he goes and ends up slotting in behind the SGL Esports McLaren in the end of all of that. But perhaps a smart decision in order to go for that, because of course, if you try to sustain the lock and then you end up in a really tricky spot with that sausage curve, because you're going to have to go either side of it, neither one is ideal, and probably would rather head towards the outside than the inside, so you've got better braking potential, and of course then you have to run off without being at risk of clattering into the back of anybody. But with the way that these drivers go and how close they are on pace sometimes, it's very rare that you will find a car all by itself on the circuit. There is usually someone giving it just a bit of a hard time in one form or another. And Spansky's now starting to maybe suffer a little bit. I'm surprised he didn't maybe try the aggressive undercut. If it is a viable strategy and other people are looking to try it, I would have thought that he may have looked to it himself and see if he could use the undercut to reel in Tinko van der Velde, because getting past is not easy when you're on the back foot, and neither of our race leaders are going to go into the pits this time around. What about the likes of Marco Bischoff? Tamsin Zahaka stays out as well. What about George Boothby and Brandon Reyes? None of them as well, and same, but it looks all the way down to the tail end of the top 10, so they stay just as they were. We'll stay with this fight though for the time being, although do need to keep an eye also on Schultzbecker, Duvela and Kohlberg as well, as meanwhile there is Sundstrom, Drexler, Proel all coming into the pits, and we'll have to see where they filter out in terms of position. Also crucially, last lap around 45.9 for Grantis Correct, because he's currently, oh dear, what on earth is happening there? That's Cody Sherratt. I do believe, unfortunately, the South African driver may have had some sort of form of a disconnect there in the background. I'm seeing some very interesting things happening at the moment. Cody Sherratt is bouncing around, and I think has bounced around so harshly he may have made his way out of the server now entirely. My leaderboard is not thanking me for trying to chip in with all of those camera angles. Maybe I want to know though was what lap times was Grantis Correcus doing. Of course, our lead stopper in that number 2 car, a 45.365, is still 3.5 tenths off our race leader, but it is definitely competitive compared to the likes of Tandem Zahaka down, because we've got a 0.7, a 0.9, a 0.9, a 0.6, a 0.8, a 0.8, and a 0.7 down towards the tail end of the top 10. And then Jardier, the first into the 46s, so a little bit of a break in the pace there, as he looks to try to see if there's any opportunity to jump up in towards the top 10. Meanwhile, Karppinen and De Campo now making his way up the order. And, well, that's a fun fact to add to the stream. Please do chip in with all these things. If you do know the drivers, also feel free to poke them for things like interviews after a race as well. But Paul Lobmeyer in the Porsche, just 14 years old. He is currently sitting in P12. So he's challenging around those top 10 positions. And for Babo Performance, which goes with the team that have delightfully supported their driver in that number 12 car. And it is fantastic, the sort of youth and talent coming through. Grantis Correcus, of course, in actual fact, I ended up racing against the Lithuanian driver a couple of years ago, where he was a similar age to what Paul would be now. And I tell you what, whilst he may have found pace since then and certainly made leaps and bounds in terms of progress for what he is capable of when it comes down to extracting pace from the car, fundamentally, he was a weapon from day one, a very talented individual. It's great to see someone like Lobmire in the server as well. With all of that, and just going to show you that regardless of skill level, regardless of age, that LFM and the Case King Pro Series, that's a fantastic platform to get involved with and really get yourself stuck into some sim racing goodness. Meanwhile, Simonov has brought out the yellow flags, a couple of yellow flags. That is for exiting the pit lane. Meanwhile, very close between Proel, Drexler, and Tony Mahoney. And it is Mahoney that is leading that group. They've all done their pit stops now. And everybody from Timu down, so 23rd position, has done their pit stops. Everyone above that point has not done their stop just yet. As meanwhile, that being said, we have the likes of Omashima and Jardier, Tanzman's the Hacker, Addison Reyes, Van der Velde, Pendant, and Durla now into pits alongside Michael Frey as well. Your race leader just starting to exit the pit lane now. It does look like, unfortunately, we won't have any more rain on the way for the rest of this race, which I'm thoroughly disappointed about. Meanwhile, someone that won't be disappointed, I don't think, is this man Tinko, who just about manages to get ahead of the scrap for what is now technically P10. Oh dear! Who was that just went flying off? Out Francesco Gardinetto. The Italian manages to gather it all up and keep it together. It's had a very bumpy time in the number 31 McLaren. Looked like he was applying the pressure not too long ago. We'll see. Can we catch what happened there? As they make their way down in towards turn 1. And see when they get towards the exit there. Oh my goodness, just caught a little bit too much of the curb, and in the process ended up absolutely flying over the apex. They're very, very difficult for the Italian driver, but he does manage to gather it all up. Very good job to hold on to that one. The livery has just been restored to that car. Meanwhile, Adam Spansky now comes into the pits. Meanwhile, Marco Bischoff deciding to stay out and go longer into the stint. And Tinko van der Velde, unsurprisingly, your fastest lap holder in this race. And oh dear, Bigginson further down the order. That is Manson and Eric Del Fanta. Del Fanta, by the looks of it, trying to wait around, and he has for that is Mikkel Sundstrom. Excuse me. No, that is Manson. They're just together on circuit. What on earth then happened there between two McLarens? I think we're going to chime in. He's come from very far away, and I think he's just completely misjudged his braking, and Del Fanta, unfortunately, a clumsy mistake, and Manson has to sit there, reverse his way off the track to get himself back underway again. And that is massive disappointment. Of course, very commendable from Eric Del Fanta to hand that position back to Manson there, but that is certainly not what he would have wanted in his race. Meanwhile, more and more people have done their stops. So it's just Marco Bischoff, Oliver Hagstrom, Dennis Vitschorka, Patrick Meyer, and Chris Smith that are yet to make their stops. So your lead pitter is Tinko with about a 3.5 second lead now. So maybe a little bit more aggressive on corner entry to make up that lap time as well. Because there is, of course, so much available in that aspect of the lap. You know, these drivers, they spend so much time trying to hook up a setup that gives you all these thousands, all these hundreds and open margins around the circuit. But something as simple as that can find you time and opportunity, and potentially the mistake that George Boothby was waiting for. In actual fact, though, George Boothby having to recover that position out of the pit stops by the looks of it from Timu Karppinen. Can Timu do anything down towards Brundle Curve? He is gaining in the slipstream there, but I don't think he's quite going to be close enough to do anything about the championship leader then. And we'll see, can we catch on board what happens between those two? So you can see Karppinen, by the looks of it, was actually ahead out of the pit stops then, and it's Boothby that's had to recover from the Lamborghini driver, and in the end, Timu Karppinen just not able to do anything about that. Meanwhile, now everyone has come in for their stops, other than Patrick Meyer, who has provided a little bit of traffic for the man that sits in P2. But they all dealt with that very, very well in the end. And now you can see George Boothby managing to hold on to that advantage and hold on to what is now P5. But crucially, that will actually turn into P4 because Brandon Reyes, in one form or another, has lost out. And I have a horrible feeling so has nobody else, because that is just a yellow flags from the pit lane, although it could get busy down in towards the Montreal curve with Samuel Fox trying to apply the pressure. Unable to make his way through, though, on this occasion. And yes, wise words from the chat there that definitely do not want to be clipping the grass. In the same way that you don't want to be taking up surface water or driving on slippery curbs when you're in the wet. That if you do get yourself on the grass, particularly because of the level of undulation that there is around this circuit, it very much is something where you can end up losing a lot of time. I think, has Korekas had some form of moment here? So he was fighting with Jardier. He was sitting ahead of Jardier then. Has there been something either with Omashima, or has there been contact with his sister teammate? No, it's just a complete mistake by himself. Does he gather up before the wall? And the answer is no. So damage then on the front left corner of Korekas' car. He does get going again, but it promotes Jardier up to P11. Patrick Meyer pitting now, and that should allow Jardier to make his way in towards the top 10. But disappointment there for the reigning Pro Series champion, whose campaign continues to be very, very tricky. As I recognise the name there, following in the chat of Henrik Gamble, of course, long-term member of K. Kramer Racing Esports, watching on and supporting Marco Bischoff in this race. I'd be interested to know from you, Henrik, actually, because, of course, you have seen the likes of your two teammates, Marco and Noah, take different cars for this season, and I'd be interested to see what you've got up to as well in the grand scheme of things in all of that, because we have seen quite a shuffle around of cars for different drivers. Sometimes you have these waves of kind of constants where everyone starts gravitating around the same sort of car, and then other times you really see this big shift and people taking the opportunity to try to explore what other options may be available out there. And yes, definitively, oh, that's big contact. I was about to say, in feedback to the sad Titanic music, well, I think that's much sadder, because that is heavy contact on the entry there in towards. That was the right-hander of Oggies there, and very wiggly exits for the Audi in the end, and that is not the way that the Audi would have wanted it to go. We'll go on board the rear diffuser of Tanvin Zahaka, and he goes wide on the exit, cuts back across to that left-hand side, and Matti De Campo is going to say that obviously he lost out a little bit in the incident as well, and Chartier said thank you very much to the pair of them. Chartier's having a fantastic time at the moment, recuperating positions, and have to see how he continues to make his way up through the order. But we'll have to see what the stewards say about that one. And it'd be great to have you back in the grid, Henrik, if you are able to make it, even if it is just for the one race. Of course, we have some spectacular tracks coming up on the remainder of the calendar. This is only just beyond the halfway point of this championship. Still plenty on the table, still plenty of work to be done for any driver who wants to be taking the top prizes at the end of this one. Meanwhile, Tinko has really got himself into a groove now in the second phase of the race. And it is a little bit similar to what we saw at Indianapolis. That's a mistake, though, from Vincent Proel and the two BMWs. Tony Mahoney does just about make his way through. Jan Drexler unable to capitalise in that instant. But as soon as you just touch a little bit of the grass, we're not in a mass class right here. The grass, it's not so much the lack of grip, it's the undulation and the the bumps that the car ends up negotiating, and strictly speaking, just the tyre is barely in contact with the ground, and what contact it is in with isn't good ground of that in order for stopping power, so you just lose all capability. The car gets upset, and it's a very tricky one to pull back. Jan Drexler going very aggressive on the brakes there, can't quite do anything about that, but like I say, Tinko van der Velde running around at the front of the field there, a little white splodge in the background. That wasn't very flattering to Adam Spansky. Nothing personal to a number 4 driver for the Audi that's running in P2 once more, but Tinko van der Velde is continuing to extend his advantage. A 44.5 last time round, a new fastest lap of the race yet again, 17 thousandths of a second faster than the previous fastest lap he did. And Adam Spansky, he's not driving slow, 44.9 from the number 4 car, but still just unable to compete with the level of pace demonstrated by Tinko at the moment. Meanwhile, Carpenter continue to harass around the rear end of George Boothby, who I think would be pretty happy to come away with P4. Not too much damage in the grand scheme of things if he were to finish there relative to Tinko and Marco Bischoff to sit ahead of him. Meanwhile, Pennon now applying the pressure to Jan Drexler, who's had a rather busy last couple of laps and is now really having to fight to hold on to his position. Meanwhile, I just want to say, fantastic to have so many of you joining us for this race. Big welcome to those that have joined during the stream, and I hope you are enjoying this Pro Series action as much as it is a joy to present. And we are very nearly at quite a cool little milestone of 250 followers, so if you are enjoying what you have seen and you want to see more of this racing, then do consider following the channel as we continue to grow here over on Twitch. But meanwhile, we're on board with Nico Pennon, the Finnish driver, trying to hassle the back of, that is Sven Por, excuse me, rather than Jan Drexler. And the two BMWs scrabbling for position. They've got Mikael Sundström, though, the Swedish driver, hunting around, not too far behind. As Carpenter actually on that last lap drops a little bit. White flag for Grunter Karekas, who continues to have a terrible, terrible time and is dropping down the order. He's now in P16. The reigning Pro Series champion is having an absolute mare here in the land of the UK. And the man that came into this season very likely thinking he was going to be looking to just continuously add to that ever-growing tally of race wins has found himself just scrabbling for points. You can see just gets it completely wrong. I heard something almost like with the gear shifts on the entry there, because it didn't, of course these cars have ABS, it's very rare to see them lock up. If he went onto the grass, we would have expected to see bumping in towards Nelson Curve there, because, well, fundamentally the nature of the circuit would have sent him bumping around, but it was almost like he went into neutral, like he was aiming for first gear and just ended up with an extra shift that he wasn't expecting. And then once you're in neutral, of course, you don't get the benefits of engine braking, and you will just soar past the apex if you're braking at normal braking points. I'm not 100% certain on that front, but I feel like that may have been what happened there to the Lithuanian. And yes, a very appropriate series of emojis in the chat. Then I think, there's the bollard. It only took 43 minutes to happen there, but the bollard has been ousted out of the way by Sven Por, who continues to be under pressure from Nico Pennon and Mikael Sundström. And pulled on by the 14-year-old is closing in bit by bit in that Porsche onto the back of this little scrap. So is Carpenter. He's regained a little bit of time over George Boothby of what he lost out not too long ago, as Adam Spansky continues to be the only other man in the 44s alongside Tinko van der Velde, but just not quite able to do enough in order to get that gap to close. It's almost 6 seconds now, but comparison to Carl Army last week, where it was upwards of 25, this is this is very much still on the cards. By comparison, though, that is a poor exit for Sven Por, and now he may start to feel himself very much under pressure. It's not the greatest of advantages, though, for Nico Pennon as they head down towards turn 1. He's gaining in the closing stages, but can't quite get alongside and isn't quite as committed through that double apex right-hander. How does he fare in towards the Montreal hairpin? Unable to make a move, stick and gaining in the braking zone was both Sundström and Lobmeyer just behind. Of course, the BMW, it's a little bit of a bulky car by nature in comparison to others on the grid, and sometimes it can just be a very nice stable platform. We saw Nils Darks get it to really work very well last week at Kyalami, and it has gone well at some other circuits as well, but hasn't always been the car that you want in terms of that raw pace. And unfortunately, Nico Pedersen almost runs straight into the back of him, and now is Mikael Sundström in the number 32 car, who's gone on board with the McLaren. He tries to find an opportunity to make his way through, and there's the 250 follower mark. So thank you everybody for all of the support over the last week or so. It's an incredible amount to grow so quickly, and look forward to continue bringing all of the action over the coming weeks of season 11 here in the Case King Pro Series, as Sundström continues to try to find areas where this McLaren is fast. You can see a little bit of an oversteer moment from Pennon ahead, but he does seem to have the pace advantage over his fellow Beamer of Sven Port. But where is this McLaren fast? And in actual fact, something kicking off further down the order. That is Kolberg Brenham, who has made his way past Stortebecker by quite a margin. So do I detect that something has gone on there down in towards Brundle and Nelson Corner? So here we go. Stortebecker sees coming under pressure down towards the inside. We know that's the wrong car, excuse me. Oh dear, just goes very wide on the exit, tries to hold it side by side, just about manages to gather it up. Very big oversteer moment on exit, and whilst the BMW goes all the way around the outside before the corner, the McLaren of Duvela isn't quite able to make his way through on that occasion, and we'll have to look for another opportunity to make up the position. Meanwhile, there's contact between Lodmeyer and Mikael Sundström down in towards Agostini curve, and then coming on through that is also Del Fanta. That is then Oliver Hagstrom, the next car along, trying to go around the outside in through Hamilton, just about manages to make it work. And that was brave, trying to recover positions, though it's Sundström is not going to work out, and he drops down the order in the process. We'll try to capture what happened there, and you can see it's just a big send from the Porsche, and I'm sure Lodmar unfortunately is going to come under investigation for that one. There haven't been too many investigations that race. You can see there's the McLaren of the SGL Esports car, but in the end not going very well whatsoever for that man as he tumbles down the order. Meanwhile, just to give you a little bit of an update on penalty situations. Meanwhile, as the gap at the front has opened up, same for George Boothby and Team of Carpenters. We go into the final 13 minutes of this race, as there's actual fact I can't get on that because there's contact between Pendon and Sven Ford, getting his elbows out. He's not usually one to make door-to-door contact, but maybe being a bit firmer than often he would be. Up into P12 for the Finnish driver in the number 21 car, and he makes his way by. It's got a bit of a gap though. It's 5.5 seconds if he wants to hunt down Addison. And meanwhile, it's all kicking off further down the order as well, because that is Proel versus Drexler now, side by side towards Palmer curve. They go over 296. He's got it on the entry, but the BMW goes all the way wide, and very aggressive from Jan Drexler there. Gets a big slide mid-corner, can't catch it. Whilst he does at least survive the Snetterton circuit, he has, of course, sacrificed quite a bit of the gap and potential advantage that he would have had in the process, and not what he would have liked whatsoever. There's some damage there on board the Lamborghini for Jonathan Clifford. As meanwhile, just checking in on Stewart's inquiries, there is actually only one penalty that seems to have been dished out, and that's for the number 10 car. And they received a 10-second time penalty as Sasha Vassner. I've just realized Sasha Vassner incredibly far down the order. I wonder, did he have a drive-through or something like that? Because I didn't see him involved in a crash. He hasn't had a penalty applied to his name, but of course, someone that was competing far higher up, than 33rd position, so not ideal at all for the Mercedes driver. But it's a 10-second time penalty for the number 10 car, and that belongs to the McLaren of Eric Delfanta. So disappointment for the man that's trying to move his way back through the field after that off at turn 1. What he's actually got now is he's got a 10-second time penalty, and he's got the company, or the latter company, of the SLE Esports sandwich he has ended up in. And it was a stop-go 30-second penalty. Thank you for the information there. So that is when you speed in the pit lane, and it's a tricky pit lane entry around here, as is the nature of a circuit. You know, you're so used to, you know, carrying all that momentum in. You've just got to absolutely nail your braking point, try to scrub off the minimum amount of speed. But unfortunately, maybe just pushing a little bit too hard to find every advantage. It hasn't quite worked for the Mercedes driver. Meanwhile, someone that could really be within contention of making up a move in the near future is Oliver Hagstrom in this number 15 car. He's sort of sneaking around the inside line of Delfanta. Surely doesn't have the opportunity to make a move. He doesn't. So he will stay just in the slipstream at the moment, trying to see if he can fill out any opportunity for the likes of Delfanta to make a mistake. He goes very wide. Might just about bring it back for the apex. You can take a variety of lines through there as long as you maintain momentum through the mid corner. It very much does give you the opportunity to explore different lines through there, but it is tricky to get right. Meanwhile, down the inside now, Oliver Hagstrom goes at turn 1 and Delfanta. Is he going to try to fight it on the exit? He's there or thereabouts. Does he think about a move towards the inside? No. He is conscious perhaps of Sundstrom in tow behind, who could very much find his way into the party. Meanwhile, it's all kicking off. For a moment, it was an absolute dead heat between Lobmeyer and Sven Bohr. Of course, Lobmeyer may end up receiving just a time penalty, generally speaking, as that's a big mistake from Sven Bohr there. He's got it all wrong, and Paul Lobmeyer says thank you very much. Doesn't need to put him under pressure at all. He's buckled under his own, and Sven Bohr unfortunately drops down to P14 in the process. Just to give an idea of biggest movers in the grid, Jardier has gained 6, 11 has been gained by Pendon, 14 has been gained by Oliver Hagstrom, and then biggest losses definitively are the likes of Delfanta with his turn 1 off. Felix Tanvin's a hacker as well. Definitely one that hasn't really benefited, unfortunately, from this circuit. Meanwhile, it's all kicking off further down the order. If I can get there in time, almost side by side on the exit of the Williams curve then. Can't get the job done there. Does he now try to think about a move towards the inside of the Brundle curve? Jonathan Clifford has lost out a chunk of time on the last lap in the process. So potential for him to end up dropping into the clutches of Pavel Stenner if he does continue to make mistakes. As there's a yellow flag out for Michael Frey. What has happened there? Oh dear! And I think that was the noise I could hear screaming in the background. The poles are dead over that apex, and that is not the way. Oh dear! And Simonov now goes flying off on the exit of the final turn, and the number 25 car gone around out of Murray's corner there, and what an absolute palaver that was through the closing stages of that sector. We'll try to go on board with Simonov because he should have. There you go. So there's a mistake for the Porsche. Michael Frey is about to come bouncing back across the circuit, and in the process trying to avoid him, Simonov goes flying back across. There goes the Porsche to recover his position, and unfortunately somehow in all of that, Simonov he does just about hold on to position in the end, but 5 seconds adrift of the man he was battling with, in actual fact the man he was expecting to perhaps inherit a position off in the process of all of that squabbling. There's also been something I think has happened between Garnetto and Alexander Krauk. Doesn't look like there'll be any scraps anytime soon. I take that back. I might have to stick on board with this because Sundstrom, the Swedish driver, really trying to surmount the pressure now and gets a shift on in that number 32 car. So again, remember, as we said at the start of the stream, if you have a number plate that is higher significantly higher than where you are running in the order at the moment, and that is a fantastic job being done by that driver. And Delphanta, multiple podium scorer, I do believe, in the Pro Series. And whilst he has struggled a bit to get this McLaren fully working and dialed in the way that he would look to have it, it certainly is no slouch. So for Sunshine to be performing in the way that he is very good from the SL Esports driver. Got 2 more of them in the server tonight. And in actual fact, if he does get Delphanta, I do believe it would be SDL Esports 15, 16, and 17, which would be quite the nice little tidy result sheet for the SDL group. Meanwhile, out at the front of the grid, it is Tinko van der Velde. He was half a second quicker. Now he's really starting to show exactly what he's capable of. That advantage already up to 8 seconds. Bearing in mind, for a good chunk of the opening 15 minutes of the race, that he was very much on the kind of, not exactly gearbox, but definitely within the vicinity of being able to strike and maybe make a move if Tinko was to have any form of mistake. Now that gap has grown significantly, and Marco Bischoff, despite being 8.5 seconds away, category lapping quicker than Adam in that P2 spot on the last lap. Meanwhile, George Boothby still maintaining good pace, only a couple of tenths adrift of the Lamborghinis and Audis ahead of him, with Tinko ignored on that front. Meanwhile, Sven Poor, I think, has had some sort of form of moment, and whilst it hasn't cost him position, it has certainly brought the likes of Manson and Hagstrom, who of course are teammates, just that little bit more into contention. So let's see how that plays out. Only 4 minutes left of this race to go. Didn't have the weather strike in the way that I thought we potentially might for today, being a British circuit and all, but very much something that these drivers will need to be aware of going forward in the Pro Series, is that, you know, they will likely run into some scenarios, some situations where they are going to have to face rather adverse and non-ideal conditions. And when that does happen, you want a car that you can execute a race with the confidence and not really find yourself struggling in those aspects of tyre wear. So just checking whereabouts Tinko is on circuit. So it should still be, there'll be 2 laps to go then. From this point onwards for Tinko van der Velde. So just 2 laps remaining for Tinko before the likes of Spansky, Bischoff and Boothby, Carpenter, who round out that top 5 at the moment, where they will find out where they are going to end up falling in the pecking order. But with no investigations on them, no penalties being dished out to any of those drivers, they are pretty safe in those positions. And like I say, I think that Bischoff and Boothby will collectively be pretty happy at minimising the damage to the Audi of Tinko van der Velde around here. Meanwhile, just as an addition, the number 12 has received a 10-second time penalty, so that belongs to... that is Paul Lobmeyer, so that's that for down the instant down towards the inside of the Agostini hairpin. So I think, unfortunately, pretty understandable for him. And then also a 10-second time penalty for number 39 car for seemingly causing some form of spin. And number 39 is Alexander Krauk. So we didn't quite capture, with all the busyness of everything else that's going on, we didn't quite capture how that took place. But he's got a big slide through a right-hander. I don't think that car is in a happy place in terms of how it's handling those tyres whatsoever. And every time he gets a slide, it's just a spiral from then on out, because you are putting more and more energy through the tyres, and they're going to get hotter, they're going to lose even more grip, and then you are going to end up in a tricky position. Of course, if you're below the pit window, you'll sometimes see drivers really kind of throwing the cars around, not usually braking particularly hard. They'll warm up the tyres in that way, but yeah, certainly at this point in time, as the tyres have worn down, Crack were really struggling with the traction. A bit of a wide moment again through Palmer Curve. But right now he's doing enough to hold on to that position at least. Sven Paul still pursued by Albin Manson and Oliver Hagstrom as through Bomb Hole they go to kick off what will then end up being their final lap. Meanwhile, last lap around, a bit of a swing in the lap time. Marco Bischoff actually 0.4 a second faster than anyone in front of him. But Tinko van der Velde still leads by just over 8 seconds. It's a 9-second lead to the last of the podium finishers of Marco Bischoff. That's not the right name. Marco Bischoff, who crucially outscores George Boothby. But just half a lap to go, and opportunity still on the cards. It's 3 wide towards the Montreal hairpin. It's almost 3 wide on the exit. Sven Paul just about manages to defend. Oliver Hagstrom can't get alongside either. Just out like that, out of nowhere, an opportunity potentially crops up, but is not quite enough for an overtake to end up coming from it, and I think that will still be safe for the time being, although there is a little bit side-by-side between Duvela and that is Steinbecker in the Audi. Duvela is going to get it, but more than that, Tinko van der Velde is going to make it 2 wins in a row, and another victory to his tally here in Season 11. He wins at Snetterton in dominant fashion and heads up the timing table to that P1 spot once more. Adam Spansky is going to take P2. Marco Bischoff should be safe for the final spot on the podium, as what has happened with Sven Paul. Sven Paul is around! Sven Paul is around, and big damage! And there was a lot of squabbling, of course, going on with those McLarens on the final lap of the race. It's still kicking off as they head down through Nelson. And they've even got Del Fanta Sundstrom involved in all of this as well. Surely, though, they stay in single file for now. Sven Paul we'll try to see if we can capture the instant, but he's really struggling with the damage on board the car. Colberg Brenham seeing red, trying to find opportunity. Jan Drexler has now gone badly as well. So both of those cars, I do think that they are teammates. The number 17, has he potentially run out of fuel? I'm not sure. Colberg Brenham isn't going to be able to make his way past Sven Paul. I don't think it's going to be a close run to the line. In the end, you can see the aero damage on board the BMW of Brenham is going to be very close between these two, but in the end, Sven Paul by 1/10 of a second is going to take that position. It all kicks off on the final lap once more. Stordebecker does end up staying behind the McLaren in the end with a big swing out to the side there. Drexler does manage to cross the line, so not quite sure what happened to him in the end. And I don't know if I'm quite even going to be able to go back and catch on the replay. I think we're a bit too far away now with all of that. Garzaneto in our pursuit of Alexander Krauk in the closing stages. Unable to make moves, though. What about the likes of Pascal Stenner, who tries to get the power down at the final corner, is unable to. And with that said and done, that is your race from Snetterton. And what a fantastic show that once again we have been given in the Case King Pro Series. Never disappointing and always just putting on stellar performances. But Tinko van der Velde, another victory to his name. Must be delighted with that one. And hopefully you might join us for an interview in the coming moments. It has been pretty hot on it. It hasn't quite had the same level of advantage as the rest of the field this time around at Snetterton Race Circuit. Spansky did keep him more honest, and he has just appeared in the interview room, so we will look to bring him on in and speak to your race winner once again. So, Tinko van der Velde, another race victory to your tally. Having you in the interview room is becoming a bit of a formality in recent times. You must be delighted with that performance. But was it as easy as it looks from an outside perspective? Were you just dialed in with the car, or was it all smooth sailing throughout that one?
Hello, evening. Well, first stint was quite tough for me because I had some pressure loss and I just felt a bit pressure from Adam and made some mistakes, ran wide on grass a few times. And yeah, I just felt the pressure, so I really couldn't get into the rhythm. But on the second stint, when I had to gap out of the pits, I just could focus really well, and it helped me, I guess. And just did really clean laps the whole stint. I think I had one slight mistake over the second stint, so that was really good.
Yeah, fantastically driven. Yeah, also what you said there, I know that obviously it made your first stint a little bit stressful, but it was slightly music to my ears because I was informing the beloved viewers of this stream of when I ended up losing out on a race victory for the very same reason. So I'm glad to know that, you know, someone that's absolutely dominated some of the races here in the Pro Series is, you know, it's a high level form of mistake. That's the way I'm going to interpret it. But you managed to drive through that one and you know, and keep up the momentum, got yourself dialed into that second stint, got yourself into groove. You know, we already knew we've had an inkling that the Audi was going to be a decent car around this circuit, and you've absolutely maximized that performance once again, and 2 on the bounce as well. And you know, for your championship hopes and you know, closing that gap towards the top, this really starts to reinstate you into a very strong position.
Yeah, especially with the 2 drop rounds, right? I think
yep,
it should be really looking good for me. With I think 1 or 2 P2 finishes and the rest wins. So yeah, it's looking really good.
Yeah, exactly. It's you've only had your 1 no-show, 0 score, but yeah, other than that, 4 victories, 2 P2s. So even though your net points tally right now, which of course will change very, very quickly once the championship standings update on the back of this one, you know, you came into this round in P4 in terms of net points, but realistically, you are very much in the midst for that championship fight. And going into the rest of the races we have coming up on the calendar, we'll be going to Misano for next week's race. So another circuit where, you know, overtaking is possible. There's a lot of flat-out sections, potentially could benefit the power of the Audi. But how are you feeling potentially for that one? Any ideas of how the Audi may fare there?
Though historically McLaren has been really strong on the track, and the Evo seems to be really strong there as well. So it's not gonna look like today or the Kailami last time around. I think it's gonna be very close next time. So it should be a very fun race.
Yeah, well, we thoroughly look forward to it, and yeah, of course, right now definitely seems that yourself, George Boothby, and Marco Bischoff kind of in the background a bit. You know, another solid performance from him today. He's keeping himself in touch of the championship fight, but definitely with the way that the cars may play out next week, that we could have a showdown between you two, which may give you a little bit more stress, kind of a bit like Brands Hatch inside the cockpit of your car. But I have to admit, from our perspective, being slightly selfish here, would give us a fantastic show. So we thoroughly look forward to seeing how things get underway for that one. But big congratulations to you taking your 4th victory of the season, Tinko. Amazing stuff from you, and really bringing yourself into championship contention once more. And thank you for joining us for another interview. Like I say, has become quite a regular thing, but always appreciated to catch up with our race winner. So amazing stuff from you.
Thank you so much.
Cheers, Tinko. Amazing then to catch up with your race winner from today, and just incredible stuff from him. The composure of that young man to make it 4 victories in 7 races, and realistically it's 4 victories in 6. This is the sort of performance we saw from Carreras last year, and as Tinko says, he is, you know, he's a clever mind behind the wheel of that Audi as well, that with the drop scores that we have in this championship, fundamentally, he has a very near perfect points tally. And when we compare that to how George Boothby has got on, particularly over the last couple of weeks now, very regularly still scoring highly. He's had 2 victories so far this season, positions usually around the top 5, but he is going to have a bit of work to do in the long run. So is Marco Bischoff if he wants to keep himself in with a shout of the championship fight. And granted, Carreras, big disappointment for him today, and a very unusual drive from the Lithuanian, the reigning Pro Series champion, really not showing the same sort of form that we have really come to expect from him after last season. But with the McLaren's looking to maybe fare well next week, we could see a very different version of Grantis in that race. We'll have a look at the race results now as we look through. Tinko taking another stellar victory with Spansky and Bischoff taking those podium positions. Boothby, Carpenter, Reyes takes P6. Great stuff from him with Omashima, Jardier, De Campo, Tansman, Zahaka, Addison, Pennon, and the three Swedes of Manson, Hagström, and Sundström rounding out the top 15 with Samir Foch, Dennis Wietschork, Paul Lobmeyer, the Mahoney, Proel, Del Fanta recovering his 21st position, Sven Paul, Kolberg, Brenner, Duvela, Schorterbecker, Drexler, Frey, Simonov, Vassner, and Meyer rounding out your top 30. And then rounding towards the tail end of the grid, Philip Weimer, Francesco Garzaneto, Chris Smith, Jonathan Clifford, Pavel Stenner, Alexander Karekas with a DNF in the end. Didn't even notice that. Very disappointing day for him. Cody Sherratt and Valentine Barrier. So championship standings, of course, we will have a hunt through those when they update ahead of the next race, which, like I say, will be taking place at the wonderful Misano race circuit. A lot easier to make overtakes happen there than it is potentially somewhere like here at Snetterton. It's a much wider circuit, and there's very long straights and some very, very heavy braking zones, but they can be tricky. That double right-hander, almost triple right-hander really, at the tail end of the back straight, you can get a mega run down there, but making a move stick is a very difficult process because, especially when the car's early on in the race, tyres maybe not quite up to temperature, pressure, and the car's heavy with fuel, it can be a little bit unstable through there because you've got a little bit like Brundle here today at Snetterton. You've got that constant turning and braking. Getting that dialed in and right when you're battling against some of the best people in ACC is a very, very tricky thing to do. But if anyone is going to be able to do it, these guys here in the Case King Pro Series will do that, and we may well indeed have a fantastic little showdown between the likes of Tinko van der Velde and George Boothby when we go into the next round, and just how good would that be? But for tonight then, that is going to be it. So thank you everybody so much for the amazing support once again during the race. The VOD will be up on the Twitch channel in due course when it finishes processing and all that jazz. So if you want to relive all the wonderful action that we had here tonight, then do look to give that a gander. And if you want to stay in touch and in tune with the upcoming Pro Series races and all of the goodness that this championship has to offer, then do think about giving the channel a follow as we continue to grow this. 258 of you now with us, which is just absolutely incredible. Thank you so much, and a warm welcome to all of those that ended up joining the stream for the first time, and a big thank you for those that followed during as well. Hope you did enjoy this race as much as it was a pleasure to broadcast. But enjoy watching the racing is one thing. Sometimes you just want to get behind the wheel, and I can't blame any one of you. And if you do fancy doing that, then head over to lowfuelmotorsport.com where you can get yourself a license, get yourself onto the platform, and you can work your way through the ranks and compete against these guys across many a different grid, whether it be the GT3 goodness in the daily races, whether it be some of these championships like the Pro Series, the Endurance Series, all of that stuff, where there are some fantastic prizes amongst all of those different championships for you to compete for. And also, if you just want to be a part of this amazing growing community, then also do look to join the Discord server as well, because all things good about real racing and virtual, we do celebrate it here amongst now what is now 100,000, over 100,000 of you parts of the LFM platform. So if you want to continue to be a part of this growing family, then do look to join the Discord server as well. Great to have as many of you with us as possible. But do look to tune in then next week when we head over to Misano for what will undoubtedly be another fantastic race. But for tonight then, it's goodbye.